All right, welcome to those who are joining in. I'm just trying to get my collective crap together for tonight's show, making sure that everything is arranged. I don't have my she-devil companion with me tonight because she's feeling a little under the weather, so I'm going to try to do this as a one-man rodeo. And so I'm getting everything lined out on my screen, trying to get my setup just right. Thank you for joining in, getting the room warmed up. Don't hesitate to tap on the screen on TikTok so that we can get some momentum going before the 6 o'clock show. That would be fantastic if you're willing to do that. Also, I need a sound check. I need a sound check preferably on both YouTube and TikTok. So if anybody's in both places, or if there's one person in one place that can give me a shout out, let me know that you can hear me. Hello, Shelby on YouTube. Do you hear me? And how's the audio sound over there on YouTube? Anybody hear me also on TikTok? Let's make sure we got both these places fired up. Just looking for a sound check from you guys. A thumbs up may be a good thing. Hear you great on TikTok. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate that, Candy. So, yeah, let's get the room kind of warmed up a little bit. We have a few minutes. If I could see my clock, it's got like 4 minutes or so before the official start of the hour. We'll start at the official start of the hour with my normal format, which is kind of a monologue, if you will. Thank you for letting me know that you can also hear me on YouTube. If you want to see the screens better, you're going to probably want to watch on YouTube because it'll be really tiny on TikTok, up above my head on TikTok, and to the side of me over here on YouTube. And by the way, there'll be an enormous delay between the stream on YouTube and the stream on TikTok. So if you do happen to want to watch in both places, which is always good for me, by the way, because then I get watch time on both platforms and that helps our algorithm. But you want to mute one or the other. In fact, if you're watching on YouTube, you want to mute the sound on TikTok so that you don't have this weird, like you're hearing everything 30 seconds before you hear it on YouTube. So that's a thing. I don't know any way around that. We got more people signing into the YouTube side. We got a couple more minutes before we get going, about 3 minutes before the start of the hour. Again, big delay. And it always tells me I have a streaming slow bit rate on here. I don't know why. My video card is really good. My PC is really good. So it still baffles me that I get any kind of data warning. Now, granted, I have a lot of things going on, but anyways, settle in, grab some popcorn. It's going to be an interesting show. I will let you know ahead of time before we do the monologue. This is going to be tonight 100% on Luigi Mangione. So if you are following me for Kohberger, unfortunately, I'm not going to cover any Kohberger stuff tonight. I would love it if you stay with us, even if you're not following the Luigi case, because it's interesting, I think, and it helps. And if you're a fan of the channel, it helps us out. So please stay a while if you're willing. But anyways, it's going to be all Luigi Mangione. We're going to be basically focusing tonight on the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the prosecution in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, who has responded to Thomas Dickey's motion to basically say that that was an illegal arrest in Altoona, Pennsylvania of Luigi Mangione. So I'm going to cover that at the top of the hour. I'm going to kind of go through the summary of how we got to where we are. And again, for me, it's a day old for you guys. Some of you have been talking about this, and your favorite YouTubers and streamers and whatever have already been giving their thoughts on Altoona, Pennsylvania and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's response to Thomas Dickey. I have to take a breath every so often. But you haven't heard my response. Well, maybe you have. By the way, on YouTube, I did do a long form video of about 15 minutes giving my initial thoughts about the arrest in Altoona, Pennsylvania, and the prosecution's response. So I did do a long form video as well there. This will be more detailed. We're going to go at a little slower pace, maybe. We're going to do a little bit more reading. I apologize. But it's alive, and I want to try to cover a lot of ground that I didn't do in that shorter YouTube video. So you're going to get some new information here, and we're going to have, I titled this very appropriately, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I'll explain that in just a moment when we get into the top of the hour. We're looking at about 1 minute or so before we officially get started. So thank you for the YouTubers that are signing in. Thank you for the TikTokers that are signing in. Looks like we've got good sound check in both places. The video, by the way, on TikTok is a little sketch because I'm actually using a virtual camera. So I look razor sharp on TikTok, on YouTube, and I look kind of muted a little bit on TikTok because I'm using a virtual camera to basically broadcast that. So I'm losing a little bit of image quality, it looks like, on TikTok. But I'm a long-winded person, and so most of my stuff's on YouTube. So there you go. Looks like the she-devil, my wife, is actually communicating with people on YouTube, so she's around. Actually, looks like she's doing it on both places. So while she's not feeling well, she's taken one for the team, and she's trying to do her best from the other room. She will not be sneezing. You can thank me for that later. So you won't get that on this live. But you also won't get her being able to interrupt me and tap me on the shoulder when somebody has something important. So I'm going to do my best to watch the screen and catch that myself. All right, it's the top of the hour. Let's get going. As usual, I have a little disclaimer that I like to give at the beginning, a verbal disclaimer, but I'm also going to try and pull it up on our website as well. It'll be above my head in just a moment. I have got the slowest I have to talk to my service provider. Anyways, this disclaimer, just a reminder that this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. I am not an authority. I am not the news. I do not presume to be the news. I am not a lawyer, although I speak a lot about legal issues and I break down the law as I understand it. And I will explain to you what I think the law says. But I'm not a lawyer, so keep that in mind. So I could be wrong. In fact, let me just defend myself. Lawyers can be wrong. In fact, we're going to talk about this tonight, how prosecutors and law enforcement can be wrong. Judges can also be wrong when they rule in favor of illegal actions by law enforcement and prosecutors. And then an appellate court can overturn a judge. So not only could I be wrong, but the prosecution could be wrong. The judge who rules in favor of a prosecution could be wrong. And an appellate court could all fix all of that. And in theory, appellate court could be wrong as well. But I explain these things on this channel, and I hope that you'll get a great education. I think you're going to learn a lot about our system. So it's all Luigi tonight. I'm calling this episode Altoona, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now, here's why I say the good, the bad, and ugly. I want to remind you that at the Devil's Advocates, we followed high-profile cases, the Idaho 4 and now, the Luigi Mangione. Actually, it was the other way around. We started with Luigi and then started picking up the Koberger case. But in all cases, we believe in the fundamental principle in this country, innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. We do not condone violence. Therefore, us saying that we presume that Luigi Mangione is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law is not somehow an endorsement for violence. Please get that straight. There are people who have tried to say that just having any kind of sympathetic feeling towards Luigi Mangione means that you are somehow a hater or promoting hate speech or promoting violence. This is not the case. We are an educational platform. We use high-profile cases like this one to demonstrate that even if, for example, even if a person is guilty, let's say you believe that Luigi Mangione is guilty of shooting Brian Thompson. If you believe that, he still has the presumption of innocence until proven guilty in a court of law going for him. And in addition, just because somebody did something doesn't necessarily mean they're guilty. As a prime example, I've given this many times, there are times when people are justified due to self-defense or defense of others. This is where it gets very complicated in this case. And again, not justifying any actions, not saying that anything was warranted, not saying anything like that, and nor do I condone violence. But you have to understand that this is going to be a difficult subject because, again, I believe in the principle in America of innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. So when I say the good, the bad, and the ugly, this is where the perspective I'm taking it. Most of you who follow our channel are supporters of Luigi Mangione in one way or another. I find that supporters of Luigi Mangione fall into three basic camps. Either you think that he's completely innocent and there's no way this nice, sweet boy would have ever done something like that, and so it's impossible. He's being framed. He's being set up. He had nothing to do with it. That's one camp of Luigi Mangione supporters. There's another camp of Luigi Mangione supporters that say that he's probably involved somehow, but he certainly can't be the one who pulled the trigger, if you will. He can't be the guy who actually did it. He may be involved. He may know people who were involved, but he's not the one who did it. And he's either then, therefore, being set up by people who he was with or knew, and he was set up unwittingly as a fall guy, or there's a group of people who believe that maybe he was involved with others and he agreed to take the fall. I've talked about this idea before on what I call the How to Blow Up the Pipeline scenario, which was a movie about a group of 20-year-olds who got together, 20-something-year-olds who got together and committed an act of eco-terrorism and then let one person take the fall for everyone so that the other ones can get away and do it again and potentially start a revolution. So that's another camp of Luigi supporters. And then there's, of course, the Luigi supporters who say he did it, but I don't care. They had this coming. And that's where you have to be super, super careful, especially on TikTok. Because, again, there's a fine line between understanding why somebody did something and condoning it or celebrating it. And so at this channel, we're not trying to celebrate anything, and we're not trying to condone anything, but we can understand the nuances of this conversation. So when I say Altoona, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It is from the perspective of a Luigi Mangione supporter, regardless of which camp you fall into, whether you think he's completely innocent, partly maybe to blame, or he's all the way in, but he's maybe shouldn't be held accountable. And here's where the good is. The good news is that I'm going to start to tell you at the beginning of the show is I'm going to tell you that I still maintain to this day that the arrest in Altoona, Pennsylvania was illegal. And I will explain to you why from the law. I'll show you once again. I've shown it to you before on other things. And I will tell you this. The prosecution's response to Thomas Dickey, where they said, no, that was totally a legal arrest. I believe they're wrong. I'm not a lawyer. And so therefore, I will point out something, by the way. So this is the good, right? The good, if you're a Luigi supporter, is I'm still maintaining that was an illegal arrest, and I think there's hope that a judge is going to see it as an illegal arrest. Keep in mind, when the prosecution responded recently to Thomas Dickey's motion, omnibus pretrial motion to basically of relief, to basically say that the arrest was illegal, it was not a surprise, people, not a surprise that the prosecution was going to say it was totally legal. They were going to say that. That was a given. So I feel a little bad for some of you who were stunned or disheartened because you found out, oh my gosh, they didn't just toss out the arrest. They're actually saying it was a legal arrest. You knew. You should have known. And maybe I'm to blame. I should be educating you guys a little bit better. You should have known that was going to be the case. Keep in mind, our legal system is set up in this way. The defense is always going to provide the absolute best case argument for why something is in favor of their guy, and the prosecution is always going to present their very best argument of why it should be the other way, and it's the judge or a jury who decides which one of them is correct. So it was a foregone conclusion. The prosecution was going to say that was 100% a legal arrest. That was understood. So nobody should be all bent out of shape that the prosecution said that. Now I will tell you that I believe that they're still wrong, and I will tell you, and it will show you in detail if you stick with me long enough tonight. I'll show you from the law what they failed to address and why they're still wrong about that arrest. It's illegal in my opinion in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. By the way, it's not the state of Pennsylvania, it's the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And I'll show you why it's still illegal what they did in my opinion, and I'll back it with receipts, if you will. What's the bad? The bad news is what Thomas Dickey has essentially admitted to in his statement. This is the 1,000-pound elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about. If you're a Luigi supporter, you're not going to like the part when we get to the bad and we get to the ugly. It's going to be a little bit difficult for you, but I ask you to stick with me. You're going to be okay. It's going to be all right. But there's some bad for Luigi and there's some ugly for Luigi if you are a supporter. But it's okay. You're going to get through it. So just bear with me and hear me out. I want to be fair with the presentation on both sides. So the bad is what basically is admitted to, if you will, what was admitted to by Thomas Dickey. And then the ugly is kind of what that says. What is the ugly is being honest with ourselves about what it says about what was admitted to. Okay, that's where it's going to get ugly, and it's one of those things that we just have to address it. We just have to talk about it. And how you feel about it at the end of the night, that's up to you. But I want to address the big elephant in the room and explain that to you. All right. So let's get in. We're going to dig into this right now. So as you know, I have stated this law many times. Let me summarize what the complaint was. By the way, I can pull it up. I don't know what order to do this in. I'm going to pull up right here. This is the Commonwealth's answer to the defendant's omnibus pretrial motion. Okay, so here we go. Let's jump to a couple of documents just to preview. This is what Thomas Dickey filed. It's on my screen. You should see it. I'm going to try to center this a little better for you guys on TikTok. All right. So this is the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus Nicholas Mangione. This was filed on behalf of Nicholas Mangione. This is Thomas Dickey's basically statement a little over a month ago that the arrest in Altoona, Pennsylvania was illegal. Let me just give a quick summary, by the way, a quick summary for people on the timeline of events. Brian Thompson was shot in New York City on December 4th. The primary suspect was identified as Luigi Mangione and arrested on December 9th after about 5 days after the event in Altoona, Pennsylvania at a McDonald's. Based in part on what was called an anonymous 911 call. It's not anonymous. We actually get to find out the name of the person who called in the 911 call. It was the manager of the McDonald's, in case you didn't know that. Some of you do already know that, because again, I'm a day late on this news for you, but it was the manager of McDonald's who called in that 911 call. It wasn't anonymous, so we know who called it in. So when they came to arrest him, there was arguments about how that transpired. Thomas Dickey indicated that Luigi Mangione was basically surrounded by police officers in a corner of the McDonald's. He was interrogated unlawfully and was not told that he was under investigation for anything. He was asked to present ID, to stand, put his hands on top of his head. He was frisked. He had his belongings taken from him, and he was searched, all without being told that he was under investigation for anything. After 17 minutes, he was read his Miranda rights. After 15 minutes, it was 15 minutes in before they actually told him that he was under investigation for anything. That was what Thomas Dickey basically outlined a month ago. He said, look, that entire arrest is illegal. You illegally detained my guy for 15 minutes before telling him he was under investigation. Now, why does it matter, the statement? If you watched my channel enough, you know exactly where this is going. Why does it matter that Thomas Dickey kept saying you hadn't informed him he was under investigation? One of the oddities of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and I'm going to read the law to you again tonight so we can try to dispel it, but I'll never be done. I'm never going to get it done being attacked on this. Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has a rule where the law states that it is not illegal, listen to this carefully, it is not illegal to provide false identification to a police officer, even in uniform, if you have not been informed that you are under investigation for something. It is not illegal to provide false identification to a police officer until you have been informed that you're under investigation. We're going to read those laws, and we're going to talk about the fight that essentially happens, because what the prosecution did is the prosecution came out and said in their response to Thomas Dickey, look, we had every reason to approach your client. We had probable cause because he was called in by the manager of the McDonald's as the shooter in New York. That's going to come out in the document. I'm not going to read you everything about this document, but the prosecution said the manager of McDonald's called in and said, I think the shooter from New York is in my McDonald's. The police then arrived. Here's the argument, and we will read some of this word for word from them. Their argument is, immediately upon arriving in the McDonald's, one of the police officers immediately recognized Luigi Mangione as the shooter in New York. That means he didn't have to go off the word of the 911 call anymore, or the manager, because he himself, as soon as he laid eyes on Luigi Mangione, knew it was the shooter from New York. Therefore, that gives him probable cause to go interrogate Luigi Mangione. That is not true, in my opinion. It's probably not true in his attorney's opinion, but the prosecution is going to state that because an officer identified him immediately as the shooter in New York. The officer then was allowed to take that suspicion and basically detain, essentially, although they argue they didn't detain him. We'll get to that in a minute, and question him. But again, I want to point out the argument in the case that the prosecution doesn't address is twofold. One, that in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, somebody can provide false identification to an officer unless they've been told they're under investigation. Thomas Dickey, Luigi's attorney, literally stated that it was 15 minutes into the investigation before he was told that he was under investigation. 15 minutes, that was after he had already provided false identification. And for the millionth time, we're going to see it's not against the law in the state and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to provide false identification to a police officer until you've been informed you're under investigation. That didn't happen for 15 minutes. And it wasn't until 17 minutes into the investigation that Luigi Mangione was read his Miranda rights. And at that point, Luigi Mangione stopped talking entirely. He just nodded from that point on and didn't speak a single word after that. He was done once he was read his rights. Prior to that, when you haven't been told your rights, everything's subject for up in the air fights, which is what we're doing in the court system. All right. Furthermore, I want to summarize what the prosecution stated. Thomas Dickey made a big point about his client was basically unlawfully detained because he was surrounded in the corner of McDonald's by a wall of officers, and that Luigi Mangione could not have left the corner of that McDonald's without touching essentially an officer and therefore assaulting an officer. So therefore, they curtailed his liberty and made it so that he couldn't leave. The prosecution responds frankly, in a half-assed manner with the following details. And we'll read some of this word for word so you can see it. Basically, their response is this. Luigi Mangione himself picked where he sat in the McDonald's. We didn't pick that. So it's his own damn fault that he sat in the corner. And it just so happens that when you sit in a corner and officers approach you, you're going to have a hard time getting out of the corner. But that's Luigi Mangione's fault. He picked the spot to sit, not us. So you are, they said, disingenuous to blame us for surrounding your person in the McDonald's because he's the one that picked the corner, not us. So it's his fault. He was surrounded by cops, not our fault. That's basically what they say. So that's how they address the no, we didn't surround him, we didn't make it, and they reiterate in the prosecution's response that Luigi Mangione was free to leave at any time he wanted to, and if he didn't feel free to leave, that's on him, that's his fault. He was free to leave, and he should have known that he was free to leave. And again, Thomas Dickey addresses that by saying, how's my guy supposed to leave when you take his driver's license and you had it for 15 minutes of time? Because again, and I want to state the one more point, we're going to read this again in your own words if you want to stick by and see it with your own eyes. What he told them was Luigi Mangione provided when he provided the false identification. That's when they got probable cause to arrest him and detain him. So they came for questioning. They said that it was totally acceptable for them to question him as a Terry frisk or a Terry stop. We're going to talk about what a Terry frisk and a Terry stop is and whether law enforcement can do that and whether or not you can provide false identification to a police officer during a Terry frisk. Surprise, surprise, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, you can. So anyways, but they said as soon as Luigi Mangione provided them false identification, it immediately escalated the arrest and turned it into probable cause, and now they have the probable cause to arrest him. But he was still not informed that he was under investigation or under arrest until 17 minutes in when they gave him a Miranda rights. All right, so we'll come back to these documents a little bit. I want to show you now, this is the Pennsylvania General Assembly. This is a snapshot of the actual law that you can see online. This is from what? Well, the page is super hard to read. I would have to put on my glasses, but it's if you just search for this, the Consolidated Statutes of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania. This is Title 18, Chapter 49, Section 14. So again, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm going to interpret the law for you, and I'm going to back it up with appellate court decisions on how this has happened in the past. False identification to law enforcement authorities. A person commits, and we're going to kind of highlight this section for you. Hopefully you can see that. And let me center it a little bit better for you on TikTok as best I can. All right. A person commits an offense if he furnishes law enforcement authorities with false information about his identity after being informed by a law enforcement officer who is in uniform or has identified himself as a law enforcement officer that the person is subject to an official investigation of a violation of law. After is the key word. That is, and I want to point out the argument in the appellate court's decisions, whenever law enforcement in Pennsylvania violates this law and they basically arrest somebody for giving false identification when they hadn't been informed they're under investigation, the appellate courts has always thrown it out. They throw it out. And the reason they throw it out was specifically, they say, the laws, every word of that law is written for a reason. If it states after, they wanted to make sure it was clear in the law that the only time it's illegal to provide false identification to an officer is after law enforcement has told you that you're under investigation. Thomas Dickey's argument is Luigi Mangione was not told he was under investigation for 15 minutes. And yet the prosecution's response was the officers had every right to question him. They had every right to be suspicious. And at the moment he provided false identification, that was within that 15-minute time frame, at the moment he provided false ID and we realized it was false ID, he committed a crime and now he was under investigation and had committed a crime. What Thomas Dickey's arguing and what I'm arguing as a layman interpreter of the law is it's only illegal after being informed by a law enforcement officer that the person was subject of an official investigation. Thomas Dickey specifically calls this out in his legal document. Let me point that out for you real quick. Let me see if I can grab that. This is Thomas Dickey's response. I've highlighted a few sections. And basically Thomas Dickey in here, I should be able to see it because he quotes the law. Right there. Approximately 7 minutes later, defendant was physically removed from McDonald's for, according to police records, being placed under arrest and taken into custody for the crime of, quote, providing false identification to law enforcement, and he was transported to the Altoona Police Department. Said arrest, this is Thomas Dickey's response to the arrest, said arrest was illegal and unlawful at this time insofar as the defendant did not commit the crime of false identification to a law enforcement officer in violation of 18 PA-CS section 4914. That's the law we just read to you. What Thomas Dickey is saying is, if you read the frickin' law, you will see that it is not illegal to provide officers a false identification until you've been identified that you're under investigation. So Thomas Dickey's not arguing that Luigi Mangione gave them false identification. What he's saying in this point 35 in his paper is, providing false information, even a false driver's license, to law enforcement is not illegal according to 18 PA, which is Pennsylvania, Title 18 Pennsylvania Constituted Statutes, Section 4914. Now, it's going to be up to a judge to read that section again and interpret that law the same way that Thomas Dickey is interpreting it, which is focusing on the key word after. It's only illegal to present false identification to an officer after you've been informed that you're under investigation. Luigi Mangione was not informed he was under investigation, and the state essentially agrees with that. So we're going to get into that a little bit more, but I want to show you back here on when the appellate courts have thrown that kind of garbage out specifically. This is from Find Law. You can see it, the case law up here. This is the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus Talicia Kitchen, 2018. The gist of this story, I'll try to break it down to you in summary. I got lots of highlights, and I don't want you to have to read all the highlights, and it's not centered well on TikTok, so let me see if I can get that a little bit better centered for you. But again, if you want to see the great quality of the letters, you're going to need to go over to YouTube. Let me blow it up as best I can on YouTube, and then centered as best I can on TikTok for you. But it's going to be hard to please everybody all the time. It looks like I'm right in between two good places. All right, so here's the gist of it. Talicia Kitchen was in a car. There was drugs apparently in the car. She was pulled over by a siren because an officer saw her fail to turn on a turn signal. So the officer threw on sirens, pulled her over, and during that investigation, when he pulled her over with sirens going and a uniform on his body, asked her name. She gave false identification. She gave them a false name. She was arrested in part for drugs that were in her car and for giving false identification to a police officer. The appellate courts reviewed the law and interpreted it the same way I'm telling you it should be interpreted, which is she was not informed that she was under investigation. And because she was not informed she was under investigation, the appellate court, the higher court, threw out the false identification part of those charges. Now, it just so happened that the officer, while he's talking to her, saw drug paraphernalia in the car, and therefore they allowed that stuff to stick. But the part of providing false identification to the officer was not allowed to stick because the officer had not informed her she was under arrest or under investigation. Sorry. Now, here's the argument that the state made, and it's the same argument that the state's making in the case of Luigi Mangione. Well, she should have known she was under investigation. It is inferred by the fact that there's sirens on behind her and she's pulled over by police and an officer is questioning her about her name. So therefore, it should be obvious to Miss Talicia Kitchen that she's under investigation. So you can't say that she hasn't been informed she's under investigation. The appellate courts disagreed. Their argument being, in all this fancy shit that I've got highlighted for you, is that it is not for her to infer that she's under investigation just because she's been pulled over by police officers. Because when police officers throw their lights on behind you, we all know we need to pull over. That's required of us. It's not admission of guilt, and it's not that you've done anything wrong. They could be pulling over the wrong person, but you can't just decide on your own, well, they must have the wrong guy because I didn't do anything wrong, so I'm just going to keep driving even though they're behind you with sirens. You must pull over. So the fact that you must pull over is not admission of guilt, and it's not in any way that you're under investigation. They then have to tell you, why did I pull you over? What are you being investigated for? This officer did not do that, and so therefore it did not stick. And in Luigi's case, in this case, in Talicia Kitchen's case, they did see drug paraphernalia, for example, in wide open view, and so that stuck. Now, in Luigi Mangione's case, that's not the case. In other words, if you say that he had a gun on him that day, the police were not, while investigating for the Terry stop, were not seeing that he had a gun and then furthered that along. There was nothing to be bothering Luigi Mangione about other than that he looked suspicious, and they did not tell him he was under investigation. This is the nuance. This is what you have to understand. They did not tell him he was under investigation. For 15 minutes, before they finally said that he was under investigation for what happened in New York. 15 minutes. That was well after he had already given them false identification. All right. So I could read you all of these paragraphs. I got a bunch of stuff highlighted. If you want to, on the YouTube channel, you can pause, you can read through. I will try to just scroll through it so you have a chance. But, better yet, you probably just want to go look at the whole court case. And by the way, the appellate courts have done this multiple times. I can't stress this enough, people. It is not, it should not go past your attention that law enforcement in Pennsylvania have multiple times violated the law, and that a judge has multiple times agreed that if a law enforcement officer asks you your name and you give them false identification, that's against the law. More than one time in Pennsylvania, a judge has agreed that you can't do that. And more than one time, the appellate courts had said, no, actually, judge, in prosecution, if you read the law, you have to inform them they're under investigation. And so judges can get it wrong too. Just keep that in mind. And people will say if the fact that they said it was legal means I was wrong somehow. And if a judge rules on it and says, yeah, you're right, that was totally a legal arrest, that doesn't mean the judge is right. The judge could be wrong. It's been to an appellate court multiple times, and the appellate court multiple times have said, no, if you have not been informed that you're under arrest, it is not their job to infer that they're under investigation, and so you can't bust them for that. All right. I want to also point out before we get into some last reading of the actual documents, and then we'll get into the ugly and the bad and the ugly. Some of you don't like ChatGPT. I find it's a great starting point. It tells you, by the way, where you get all this information, so I can fact check it. I asked the question right here from ChatGPT. We have established that providing false identification to an officer is not a crime in Pennsylvania unless the person has first been informed they were under investigation. How does a Terry stop factor in? Now, this is what's important. The officers indicated that they performed a Terry stop on Luigi Mangione. A Terry stop allows law enforcement under very short period of time to detain a person for questioning. But here's the kicker. If you watch what ChatGPT says, and I'll try to blow this up for you, and it gets into the nuances and explains where it's at, and you can look up and fact check it. The gist of it is, ChatGPT agrees that even providing a false driver's license to an officer during a Terry frisk is not illegal, unless you have been informed by the officer that you are under investigation. If someone, here it is, false information during a Terry stop. If someone provides false identification, e.g. a false driver's license during a Terry stop, it may not automatically lead to a charge of providing false identification unless the individual is informed that they were under investigation. What does that say? Let's read that two different ways. If Luigi Mangione was not informed that he was under investigation for anything and was not informed of such, providing false driver's license to them is not illegal in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I realize no one understands that. They don't get it. They're like, that can't be true. You have to do what the police say. You have to answer. No. The Commonwealth appellate courts have stated there's a reason why the law was written, that it's only illegal to provide false identification to an officer after you've been informed that you're under investigation. And according to ChatGPT, when I asked it to clarify, what if it's a Terry stop? Even in a Terry stop, if you provide a false driver's license to law enforcement when you have not been informed that you were under investigation for something, it is not illegal. I realize ChatGPT is also not a lawyer. And again, lawyers can get this wrong. All right. So let's get into a little bit of the documents themselves. I just want to highlight a few of the sections, and then we'll end on two things. We'll end on the what I call the bad and the ugly about this for Luigi supporters, and then I'll open up for questions and answers from the peanut gallery, if you will. All right. So this is the Commonwealth's answer to Thomas Dickey's motion to basically say it was an illegal arrest. Here's one of their points. Defendant was remanded without bail at the time of his primary arraignment. Okay, this is just basically stating the facts of what happened. His alleged act of verbally providing a false name and physically producing a patently false identification from another state when asked to identify himself to a duly sworn enforcement officer in Pennsylvania, and his illegal possession of a concealed firearm and suppressor. So they're basically outlining he was busted for providing false identification. I need to slow down. He was busted for providing a false name and patently false identification to a duly sworn officer in uniform. They also point out in here that the Commonwealth possesses video evidence of the defendant's alleged crimes in Altoona, Pennsylvania on an officer's body-worn camera. I would argue, why haven't we seen that? I would argue, and this is just me, the reason why you haven't seen the body-worn camera is because it will show it didn't go down exactly like they say it will. It'll probably show to you that Luigi Mangione was never informed that he was under investigation at the point they asked for his driver's license. Their argument is Luigi Mangione should have assumed he was under investigation because the officers approached him and asked him all kinds of questions. He should infer. Appellate courts have repeatedly said, no, sir. You do not have to infer you're under investigation. You must be told you're under investigation. So this is going to be whether the judge can read correctly and interpret the law correctly. And if he doesn't, whether an appellate court will once again toss it out. So it's not over, folks. This thing is not over. The cameras, they said the body-worn camera captures the act of him producing a forged driver's license with false name to officers, as well as physical evidence recovered from his property. They deny that law enforcement illegally acquired any of the evidence in the case. Of course they're going to deny that. The Commonwealth avers that the police at all times acted within their authority bestowed by the law. Of course they're going to say that. They point out that the 911 caller who identified herself as the manager of the Plank Road McDonald's, she had basically told them what the Mangione was wearing and stated to them that she feared that he was the shooter from New York. The 911 caller indicated that she was asking for police assistance because she could not, I don't know why could not, but she could not approach or confront defendant Mangione personally. Maybe she was afraid, maybe she was doing that, hey, I'm busy, I got to work the back counter, I can't go deal with this, you guys need to come. Whatever the case, it doesn't matter. I'm not blaming her for being afraid of approaching a criminal if that's the case. I'm not afraid, but it's just weird that they worded that she could not approach or confront Luigi Mangione. I don't know why she couldn't, other than maybe she just said, I'm too busy, I can't go out there, I'm working. Officers responded to the restaurant and corroborated the caller's information by virtue of their own observation of defendant Mangione. This is where they're laying the groundwork. The officer doesn't need anybody to have called it in because once he arrived, he immediately recognized the shooter. Now, I would say, I'm going to be a little sarcastic here, good on him that apparently he can immediately identify the shooter when a whole bunch of us all over the entire country can't seem to identify if Jake Gyllenhaal is the guy who lowers his mask at the hostel or whether it's Luigi Mangione. Because we can't seem to have definitive proof on whether that's the same face or the same person. A whole bunch of people think it's not the same person, but apparently this officer, immediately upon seeing Luigi Mangione with a mask over his face, knew it was the shooter from New York and had no question. Therefore, he argues, he can continue with basically interrogating Luigi Mangione because he doesn't need anything else. He verified with his own eyes this is the shooter from New York. All right. So it goes on to say that one of the officers was familiar with the New York investigation from his own personal observation of national media reports, including being familiar with the photos depicting defendant Mangione circling around New York Police Department. Consequently, it is factually inaccurate to claim that the Altoona police officers lacked knowledge of origin, genesis, or basis of information and whether or not the information was reliable. So in other words, what they're saying, Thomas Dickey said the officers had no reason to detain or harass or investigate Luigi Mangione because they didn't know anything about him other than he looked suspicious. Their argument, the prosecution's argument, is no. Our officers immediately recognized him as the shooter from New York, and so there was no longer any question about him being suspicious. We knew who he was. We recognized him. If you want to cry BS, I will cry BS with you on that one. But anyways, that's what they're going to argue because they have to. That's what the prosecution's always going to tell you their best case. It's up to a judge to read through the BS. They admitted, the prosecution, that prior to personally interacting with the defendant Mangione, Altoona police officers did not contact Pennsylvania, New York, or other federal law enforcement to inquire about whether the person was told or blah, 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 blah. So basically, they're just admitting, we didn't get any inside tip this was the shooter. Our own officer identified him with his own eyes. It's all we needed. Now, they said they admit their officers were in uniform when they approached him while carrying their department-assigned duty equipment as the profession requires and properly displaying their police badges as visible proof of their authority, making it clear to the defendant to whom he was furnishing forged identification. Denied that the officers' wholly legal uniform badges and equipment in any way vitiates the legality of their interaction with the defendant. What does this mean? So Thomas Dickey says, police officers in uniform surround my guy in the corner And he is under the impression he must comply because they're in uniform. And they're arguing, you're right. There's no argument that we approached in uniform. We don't disagree. We approached him in uniform. And therefore, he should have known he must comply because we're in uniform and we have authority. It's like these guys don't read their own law. They have to be in, you can't infer because a police officer is standing in front of you that you're under investigation. You must be told you're under investigation. So it's all going to come down to the body cam, in my opinion. It's all going to come down to the body cam footage. Does the body cam footage show an officer saying to Luigi Mangione, hey, we're approaching you because you look like the shooter in New York and you're under suspicion for the killing of Brian Thompson, and so we're going to ask you a few questions. If that happens on body camera, Thomas Dickey and Luigi Mangione are done. If that happened within the first few minutes of them approaching Luigi Mangione. But Thomas Dickey tells you he's watched the body-worn footage, the film, and no officer informs him he's under investigation for 15 minutes. So it's who do you believe at this point? The judge is going to have to rule on this. They admit, to the extent that the defendant accurately identified the physical location of himself in Altoona, with the clarification that the defendant bears sole responsibility for the table he selected within the restaurant and the specific chair and table at which he has placed the defendant between the wall and the table, as the defendant was already seated and settled when the Altoona police arrived and not directed to any specific seat or location by them. Any inference that they physically trapped him is disingenuous. What does that mean? Luigi Mangione picked where he wanted to sit in the restaurant. He happened to sit in the corner. If it's just too bad that when officers approach him, he's pinned in the corner, that's his own damn fault. He picked the corner office, and you saying that we somehow trapped him in the corner is disingenuous. It's not telling the whole truth, because the truth is Luigi Mangione picked a corner spot. That's what they're saying. All right? The defendant bears sole responsibility for the table he selected. They repeat that again several times. Any inference that he was physically trapped is disingenuous. They say that several times. Officer stood directly in front of the defendant. The officers had reasonable suspicion to support an investigatory detention to identify who defendant Mangione was and whether he was the homicide suspect. So again, their suspicion is because an officer identified him immediately as the shooter in New York, so therefore they had reasonable suspicion, but they didn't inform him that he was under investigation for the shooting in New York. They didn't inform him he was under investigation for anything. They just said, hey, you look suspicious. That's it. That's not under investigation. He was not informed he was under investigation. So the prosecution continues. Police conducted a lawful investigation, a detention of the defendant based on information provided by the Blair County 911 dispatch, combined with the officer's own observations. Blah 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 blah. They deny that they initially seized the defendant in custodial detention because basically he picked the corner. So the investigator detention is temporary and limited seizure of an individual that requires reasonable suspicion that criminal activity is afoot. This is where they're laying down the groundwork that it was a Terry stop. It's a Terry frisk, was allowed law enforcement to temporarily detain somebody for questioning. And so that's a Terry stop. But again, I would argue, I've shown some evidence to you already, that even during a Terry stop, it is not illegal to provide false identification, including a false driver's license, to a police officer during a Terry stop or a Terry frisk, because you have not been informed you're under investigation. Yes, I hit things a lot of times, but I feel like I don't want you to miss the point. You're not going to. If you watch my show, you don't miss the point. I'll tell you a bunch of times. It is further denied that the 911 call averring that McDonald's patron may be a New York shooting suspect and the officer's personal verification of the averments do not constitute reasonable suspicion. So in other words, the call and the officer identifying them both was reasonable suspicion, so you can't say it wasn't reasonable. It was totally reasonable. And I'm just trying to skip through because I don't want to hit this a million times. I'm just looking for the key points that I want to point at this point because I think we're wrapping this up. They say they have reasonable suspicion to effectuate an investigative detention. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court recently affirmed that a police officer's reasonable suspicion to effectuate an investigative detention for their own safety as much as their lawful ability to conduct necessary investigative measures. They quote basically this huge paragraph, which I could read you and bore the hell out of you. You probably have already seen the documents yourself. It does nothing. It does talk about a Terry frisk. It does talk about a Terry stop. But again, it does nothing to invalidate the law that states that you still have to be informed that you're under investigation, that it's not illegal to provide false identification to a police officer when you've not been informed that you're under arrest. So they just basically say, hey, we have the right to do a Terry stop. Yes, you do, but providing false identification during a Terry stop is not illegal. The interaction between the police officers and the defendant cannot be quantified as a stop because defendant Mangione was seated at a table in a public restaurant where he remained for a considerable period of time, and the police had equal access and authority to be in the presence of that location as the defendant. And he was free to go if he wanted to, is what they basically argue. Once, this is the key, once he produced a fraudulent and forged identification, the encounter immediately ascended to probable cause arrest. This is the key. This is the key everything hangs on in my unqualified legal opinion. At the time, this is their statement. Once Luigi Mangione produced fraudulent and forged ID, the encounter immediately ascended into a probable cause arrest. What's the problem with that? $1 million question, ding, 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 ding. If you got the answer, you know the answer to this. What's the problem with it? He's not illegal to provide false identification to a police officer if you've not been informed that you're under investigation. It's the chicken and the egg thing. So they're like, hey, once you provided false identification, now we have probable cause to arrest, seize all of your equipment and investigate. Problem is, he wasn't informed that he was under investigation for 15 minutes. He wasn't read his Miranda rights for 17 minutes. And so therefore the search of his bag, because they have, so follow the logic, we now have probable cause to search your bag because you provided illegal and false identification to a police officer. However, if you have legal authority to search his belongings because he committed a crime of providing false ID to an officer, and it turns out that the appellate courts or the judge decides he didn't commit a crime by providing illegal documentation to a police officer, then the search was illegal. You follow the logic? We were allowed to search him because he provided a crime by providing false identification to a police officer, but if that turns out that it wasn't illegal for him to do that, then the search is also illegal. All right? There's a lot to cover. All right, let's wrap up because I don't need to read all of this. I'm trying to get better at not reading so much to you that it becomes freaking Dr. Seuss bedtime stories and you get tired and fall asleep on me. So let's get to the bad and the ugly before we open it up for comments at the end. For those who are Luigi Mangione supporters, I want to make it clear. Here's the bad news, if you will. The things that Thomas Dickey doesn't argue with, like the notebook. Thomas Dickey does not argue that there was a notebook in Luigi Mangione's backpack that had scathing notes perhaps about the healthcare industry. Thomas Dickey's argument is that those were personal notes of Luigi Mangione and not a manifesto. In fact, one of the things I should have pointed out to you is the prosecution defines what a manifesto is. They specifically we're having a fight, a war of words over manifesto. Here it is, section 103 of the prosecution's response. By way of further answer, the word manifesto is defined by Merriam-Webster's dictionary as a written statement declaring publicly the intentions, motives, and views of the issuer. It is specifically averred that there exists abundant circumstantial evidence to support the officer's characterization as defendant Mangione's written documentation of his intentions, motives, and views that he intended for the same to be eventually disclosed to the public. Let's break that through the universal translator. Thomas Dickey is not arguing, this is the bad for people who are super Luigi Mangione supporters. He's not arguing Luigi Mangione had a notebook in his possession and that it may contain information that is maybe not so good on the healthcare industry. But he calls it personal notes, not a manifesto. And Thomas Dickey's complaint is that by labeling it as a manifesto, like it was written for the public, and that's the whole argument, right? So the prosecution's argument is, we believe Mangione planned on having those words eventually hit the public. We believe that was his intent. So therefore, calling it a manifesto is okay because a manifesto is something that's written for the public's consumption to understand why they did what they did. And we believe that's what Luigi Mangione intended by that notebook, that the public would eventually read it, and therefore it's a manifesto. Thomas Dickey said those notes were never intended for the public. That's a personal notebook of Luigi Mangione and his personal thoughts about things, and wasn't intended for the public, and therefore is not a manifesto. And you using the word manifesto is tainting the jury. Right? And they would argue it doesn't taint the jury at all. Nobody intentionally, this is their last paragraph or last sentence in point 104. The Commonwealth adamantly denies that the use of the word manifesto was employed to purposely prejudice any potential jury. So, what's the bad news? Well, the bad news is, for those who want to believe Luigi Mangione had nothing to do with it, is that he did have a notebook in it that even the defense is arguing was there. He also had a clip with bullets in it that the defense also admits is there. Now, it can be argued, and I could get into the nuance for you, it can be argued that Thomas Dickey is not admitting there was a gun in the backpack. What he states is that during the initial search of Luigi Mangione's bag, a clip with bullets in it was found wrapped inside some underwear. Don't go there. The point being is that the clip, that once they saw the clip, they immediately stopped the search, they repacked his bag, and they took him to the police station, and then at the police station, further found that there was a 3D gun and other things in the backpack, including a whole bunch of extra stuff. Thomas Dickey doesn't argue the clip part, but he does state that when they got to the police station and a further investigation was done, they now all of a sudden have a gun and all these other things. Now, Thomas Dickey doesn't say those were planted. Thomas Dickey doesn't argue whether they were there originally or not. He just states the facts. You found a clip, you repacked his bag, and then later at the station, and now all of a sudden you've got a gun, you've got a whole bunch of stuff, a manifesto, all these other things. But he does admit that the book was there, the notebook. And here's the ugly. And this is the part that I said that we just have to address the frickin' 10-ton elephant in the room, whatever it is. If Luigi... So keep in mind, there's several things that make it possible that Luigi Mangione is involved in this event. And we just have to be fair with those facts. Luigi Mangione, when he was arraigned, for example, and they were listing the things that they had against him in his arraignment, they listed things like the gun and the manifesto. And then they listed things like cash, $8,000 in US cash and like $2,000 in foreign currency. And Luigi Mangione's basically leaned forward and said, I want to make a correction. I don't know anything about this money. Now, one can infer, if you're just trying to put some logical deduction on your mind, that Luigi Mangione didn't seem to have a problem with that he had a gun in his possession and that he had a red notebook in his possession, or any of the other things that they said he had, like maybe even a confession letter to the feds in his possession. What he complained about was the money. I didn't have that money in there. And it suggested that he was saying that the money was planted. But the 10-ton elephant is, was he basically conceding that, yes, I had a gun, those were not planted, I did have a red notebook with all this stuff in it, that's not planted. Maybe there was a letter, confession of some kind, that wasn't planted, because again, Mangione didn't argue with that. Now keep in mind, his lawyers are going to strongly advise that Luigi Mangione don't speak anymore, that he lets them do all the speaking. The other thing that I want to say, just to be fair with this whole thing, is the famous scene when Luigi Mangione is being taken out of a police car and shoved back into the detention center, and he takes a moment to scream at cameras. Something to the effect of, and in the first part of his statement was cut out, I don't know if you guys have all ever been able to clear up what he says, but completely lost touch with the American people and their lived experience was the essence of what he said. He was yelling at the cameras, they or somebody is completely out of touch with the American people and their lived experience. One can infer that if Luigi Mangione has a beef with the health insurance industry, that's exactly the kind of thing somebody might say. That the system is completely out of touch with our American lived experience and what's happening in our country. And so those words could be a little incriminating, if you will. Because what else is he talking about? What Luigi Mangione didn't say is, I'm completely innocent, this is bullshit. It was, they're out of touch with the American people and their lived experience. So again, I want to be clear. I believe in the presumption of innocence until proven guilty in a court of law. Nothing has changed. Please don't go out there and say, oh my God, devil's advocate's changing his position. Now all of a sudden he thinks Luigi could be guilty. And I'm not, no, Luigi Mangione is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. I've also pointed out to you many, many times that the law is very nuanced. Self-defense, you can actually harm another individual in self-defense, and it is not a crime because our country allows self-defense. Our country also, by extension, allows a really interesting loophole, which is defense of others. So if you see somebody else their life is in danger, you can defend somebody else's life in defense of others, and that is also legal and not a crime. So just saying whether or not somebody pulled the trigger or not doesn't mean that they're guilty. So this is the part you need to understand in America. So again, I'm not advocating violence. Please get this clear. I'm not advocating violence. I'm not even saying anything was justified. What I'm saying is if Luigi Mangione is guilty of being involved in this, it's still not the end of the story. Because in our country, we have self-defense and defense of other laws that may come into play. And I've speculated many times that the defense may be setting up a situation in which the healthcare system is going to be seen as the real predator in this situation, and that whoever did with this act was doing it in defense of others to save lives in America. That's going to be potentially the argument. I can't prove that. That was the subject of the Law and Order episode called Folk Hero, which was depicted after Luigi Mangione, and that was their argument in that fictionalized story, is that the shooter did this to save lives, because every single day people are being denied coverage, they're dying. And so therefore it was an act of defense of others. Now, whether or not that's going to come out or not, we don't know. But let me reiterate, my channel will always maintain the presumption of innocence until proven guilty in the court of law. We can theory craft, we can ask questions, and we can be honest with ourselves. Unlike some of the people who are the guilters, who refuse to look at the possibility that he might not have done it, we can be more open-minded and say, hey, we don't think he did because we believe in the presumption of innocence, but if he did, can we understand why he did it? I think that's all I've got for tonight. I'm going to try to look at both channels, YouTube and TikTok, see if you guys have any questions that I can address. I'm going to need to put on my glasses. Oh my gosh, I'm going to need to put on my glasses to read all this little tiny print. I'm an old man. So let's see. Is there going to be a hearing in Pennsylvania on Dickey's motion? I don't know if there'll be a hearing. What I believe, Renee, on YouTube is that a judge is going to review now Thomas Dickey's motion and the prosecution's response and rule on it. I don't know that there's going to be a hearing on it. He or she may just rule. This is what I've looked over. I've read the law myself. I understand the nuances, and this is my ruling. Now, whether or not there's a possibility, now that the prosecution has responded, I suppose, I don't know the legal process well enough. This is where I say I'm not a lawyer. Now that the prosecution has responded and stated why it's totally illegal, will Thomas Dickey need to clarify, you're missing the point of Title 18? Will he point out the law and make sure the judge sees it? He probably doesn't need to do that. In fact, that might be seen as a sign of disrespect. He's already pointed out the law. It's understood that the judge will read the law himself or herself and interpret the law correctly. So I don't think that Thomas Dickey needs to reiterate to the judge. So I think we're just waiting for the judge to rule which side made the better argument in their opinion. He's obviously guilty of the crime. Okay, good for you. Unfortunately, this is probably not the channel for you, because we believe in this country, we believe in the presumption of innocence until proven guilty in a court of law, and we don't believe in trying people in the court of public opinion before they've had their first day in court. So, unfortunately, that's the way that goes. Prosecutor's exact words, we gave a voluminous amount of evidence, but a lack of quality, right? Any other comments? Hope you're all going to see the trial through a television live stream, because I live in Holland. I won't be able to travel to court. You know, New York has a habit of not televising their courtroom proceedings. I don't know that they're going to want to televise this one. There'll be a push to televise it for sure. It's captured national attention, but I suspect they will keep it under wraps. That's my guess, but we'll see. Anything else? Any other comments or questions? Anybody want to tell me that I'm an idiot? That's what I usually get. Like, you're an idiot. That guy's guilty. I want to thank everybody, by the way, for coming in tonight. Thank you for supporting us on both TikTok and YouTube. I've got some exciting news about the future of this channel for YouTube coming up, but I'm not going to do it tonight. There's subscriber-only area on TikTok where I'm going to let my subscribers have a chance to hear the exciting new news first as a perk for being a subscriber. And then I'll let you guys probably know by the end of the weekend the new news that is of importance for the Devil's Advocates channel on YouTube. These recordings are aired on YouTube as well, so I simultaneously stream to TikTok and YouTube. You can watch the replay if you missed it, or if you just got a portion of it and you want to know what I said earlier, you can catch that by going to my channel, Devil's Advocates 2024 on YouTube, and then you can watch it in its entirety. You can watch other videos I've made breaking down the law. Thank you, Brutally Honest, for saying that I'm doing a good job. I appreciate that very much. Who was on the phone that early? If you're talking about the shooter on the phone, that's proof. Not proof. Evidence to me that there's an accomplice. I've believed from the very beginning that there's an accomplice in this situation. What do you think that the judge will rule, or what do you think the judge by rule on PA? I'm assuming what you mean is how do I think the judge is going to rule? I'm a cynic by nature, so I suspect the judge is going to say that the prosecution made an argument and that the arrest was legal, because I'm a cynic. Now, in my opinion, I will tell you, if the judge was reading the law carefully, he or she will find that that's not true and they violated the law, unless we don't have the body-worn footage, you and I. So if the body-worn footage makes it clear that an officer told Luigi Mangione he was under investigation before asking for his false ID, then they will rightfully rule that the false ID was a violation and was illegal. If, however, the body-worn footage is reviewed and an officer does not say that Luigi Mangione is under investigation for anything, the judge should rule, in my opinion, in my unprofessional legal opinion, that that was an illegal arrest. But being a cynic, it's happened many times that judges will rule in favor of the prosecution and say, well, of course you can't provide false identification to an officer. I agree. And then the appellate court has to step in after an appeal and say, no, actually the law specifically states the word after they've been informed that they're under investigation. So again, my guess, it's a pure guess, is the judge is going to rule that it was a legal arrest. But there's a part of me that says, if you were to put a number on it, I would say a 30% chance maybe that the judge will rule correctly. And by correctly, I mean if the body-worn footage shows that an officer never told him he was under investigation. If it's true, an officer never told him he was under investigation, and a judge sees that, and a judge understands the rule, then I believe they will be forced to say that was an illegal arrest. Thanks for all the questions. Okay, I think we're kind of wrapping up. Thank you for listening to my rants. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please, on both channels, like, subscribe, follow, whatever you can, notification bells and YouTube. It's really important for me. The watch time when you watch videos is really important for me. It all helps the algorithm. All these things that we ask about as content creators are true. It's important for you to like, subscribe, and show support, and comments. Comments are big. Bookmarking a video of mine or sharing it with another person is enormous to the algorithm. So if you believe in the work that we're doing and believing in the presumption of innocence and educating the public on the legal system and the court of public opinion and how these things work, please do us a favor, because it's free to you, to just give me a like, a subscribe, a thumbs up, a share, or a bookmark. With that, have a great evening, everybody. I love everything you guys have done supporting this channel. Those of you who are my loyal favorites, you know, the favorites or followers, Renee, all the people that I see, my regular faces, Natasha. I see people all over the place in my users that I see every Mifo. I see you guys all the time. So thank you so much, you guys. You guys are regulars. You're always here. You guys are amazing, and have a good night.